The Battle of Midway was to prove the turning point of the war in the Pacific, and the successful landings in the Aleutians were to be of little avail. Yet there was some consolation for the Japanese when, on the afternoon of the 7th of June, one of their submarines, which had been patrolling off Midway, struck the crippled Yorktown with 2 torpedoes. But it was not until the following day that the Yorktown finally sank, going down with her battle ensign flying. The Japanese were still determined to take Port Moresby, however. This time they decided to land on the northern coast of Papua New Guinea and then strike overland through the Owen Stanley Mountains along the Kokoda Trail. A small Australian force had been sent to cover the north coast and initially managed to hold the Japanese when they landed in August 1942. But after a month's tough fighting, the Japanese forced the Australians to pull back down the Kokoda Trail. It was a grim withdrawal, and many sick and wounded Australians owed their survival to dedicated Papuan porters. Reinforcements, both Australian and American, were landed at Port Moresby and slowly began to push the Japanese back. The struggle, however, was a very tough one, amid fetid jungle, tropical rains, and the razor-backed ridges of the Owen Stanleys. Malaria, too, was rife. It was not until January 1943 that the last Japanese resistance on Papua New Guinea was eradicated. But elsewhere, the Allies had also been showing aggression. In May 1942, British troops landed on Vichy French Madagascar in the Indian Ocean, fearing that the Japanese might use it as a submarine base. It was, however, to be 6 months before the French finally surrendered. Meanwhile, some American troops had been sent to Australia, and on the 2nd of July 1942, the American Joint Chiefs of Staff ordered General MacArthur to invade the Solomon Islands. He was given just 1 month to prepare. The 1st US Marine Division, which had recently landed in Australia, was selected for this operation. The Marines hastily set sail, but had to put into New Zealand in order to reorganize their stores. This gave them a little more time to carry out combat training. On the 31st of July, the Marines set sail once more for what the planners called Operation Shoestring, because of the lack of resources. Naval support had to come from Hawaii and was built around 3 carriers, the only air support available. This met with the landing force at Fiji, and the combined force then sailed on to the Solomons. Here the island of Guadalcanal had been selected as the initial objective. The Japanese had been constructing an airfield on the island, and this was to be the initial American target, so that the landing force could have early ground-based air support. At 6:15 a.m. on the 7th of August 1942, 3 cruisers and 4 destroyers opened fire on the Guadalcanal coast. 30 minutes later, the order, "Land the landing force," was given. The naval bombardment, augmented by carrier-based aircraft, continued. The Marines began to head for the shore. bombardment rose in intensity, and the first wave landed. But the 2,200 Japanese on the island had quickly withdrawn inland. This enabled the follow-up waves to be speedily put on shore. By the end of the day, 11,000 US Marines were ashore on Guadalcanal. They began to advance towards the as-yet uncompleted airfield. This was secured on the following day, but still needed much work on it before aircraft could land. Yet the Japanese were not prepared to allow Guadalcanal to fall, and quickly landed reinforcements. These soon began to attack the Marines, and a bloody stalemate ensued. More Japanese forces were landed on the northern coasts of Guadalcanal and moved up through the jungle to the front line. Work on the airfield continued. But even the landing of the first American aircraft on Henderson Field on the 26th of August did not break the deadlock. Indeed, Japanese efforts to retake the airfield intensified. At sea, the Japanese used warships to bring in reinforcements and supplies, the system which the Americans nicknamed the Tokyo Express. There were a number of naval clashes during the hours of darkness in the waters around Guadalcanal. These demonstrated the superiority of Japanese night-fighting techniques over those of the Americans, who lost several ships. There were also numerous Japanese air attacks on the ships of the Guadalcanal task force. These attacks forced the American carriers to withdraw, but not before they had sunk a Japanese carrier. The Japanese continued to land men on the island by night. These reinforcements increased the pressure on the American Marines, especially since there were no troops to spare to bolster their strength. They became increasingly exhausted, and their casualties mounted. Not until December were they relieved by 3 fresh divisions. They lost no time in mounting a major attack against the Japanese. Resistance was stiff, but continued pressure wore the Japanese down and forced them to withdraw. In early February 1943, the surviving Japanese forces on Guadalcanal were evacuated by the Tokyo Express. They had made the Americans fight bitterly for their first island foothold in the Pacific, the first